Hey, friends and family, you are listening to My NYC on the Manhattan Ave channel. Today we're talking to Margie, who moved to New York City in 1984. Like so many before her and so many after her, she had her eye on Broadway and she wanted to become a star. And should you ever have the privilege of meeting her, you would completely understand why. She just has that je ne sais quoi. She has a presence. She has the it factor. She is a friend of mine, and I used to tease her by calling her Hollywood because she always just seems to have stage lighting following her around and a slight wind blowing through her hair. But she ended up leaving New York City in 1991 after 7 years. She got married and wanted to start a new chapter in her life. But now she's going to share with us what her life was like when she lived here, starting with a topic that most New Yorkers truly love to talk about: real estate.
My first apartment was in Brooklyn Heights. Turned out to be an illegal sublet. Oh, well. Had a bay window on the sixth floor of Columbia Heights, which is that street that runs right along the promenade. We had a dead-on view of, well, we could look there toward the Statue of Liberty. Right there was downtown New York. To the right was the Brooklyn Bridge. It was so beautiful. And we moved in June 15th. We stayed till September 1st. And the sun would set over the Statue of Liberty. And so my roommate, Lorraine, and I, sometimes we were new to New York, and so we'd make dinner and we put the little dining room table in the bay window, 3 windows. And we said every night, we should run like a little restaurant. If we could cook, that would be great. And invite people who are going to get engaged that night, because it was so, do you know what I mean? That would be the thing. We used to argue about like what the best sunset was, and she liked the dramatic clouds, and I wanted it crystal clear with just the gradation of pink and purple and blue. It was a building that was owned by the Jehovah's Witnesses. That used to be the Jehovah's Witness headquarters of like the world, was Brooklyn, and they owned tons of buildings there. And really everybody there was super nice, but it used to be a hotel. Now, of course, Matt Damon lives there, and now it's like a multi-million-dollar building. But at the time, it had been a rent-controlled or rent-stabilized building. And then the Jehovah's Witnesses bought it, and they started renovating the building. But they still had a phone service, an old-fashioned phone service like a hotel, so that every phone call had to go through the switchboard to an apartment. And every phone call that we made, they would write down, handwritten, calling this number and charge us 50 cents a call. Okay, so there's my first apartment. And within about 30 days of our being there, we got a knock on the door. And it was the sheriff saying, now what are you doing here? I said, well, we've sublet this apartment. And they said, well, it's illegally sublet because the landlord or the tenant never asked to sublet. And we later found out that all you have to do in New York City if you want to sublet is ask the landlord. And if the landlord says no, you can say, well, you're being ridiculous. And that you just have to go through that little charade. So did not. And then the guy who subletted to us was in London. He was actually a writer for Time magazine. And he started calling us early in the morning from London saying, we need to get out of our house. This is our home. This is where we live, our apartment. You need to leave. And, I'm like in tears. The phone's ringing at 6 a.m. saying, where am I going to go? We have this sublet. It's supposed to be 3 months. We ended up at Brooklyn Housing Court, and we got out of there 15 days early. We found a place. It used to be, we would look for an apartment and you'd look in the New York Times, right? Everything was listed in the New York Times in print. Imagine that. And, any really sought after rentals often had a key fee, something that was almost expected, particularly if you wanted to lock into a rent stabilized apartment, because once you did that, you were really golden. So a key fee was money, I think, that would go to a superintendent or somebody who was managing a building. It just was a big chunk of money. It could be thousands of dollars. And Nora Ephron is the one who has the best story about the key fee. She had left New York, and she said, I remember in her book, she said, the biggest problem with leaving New York is you feel like you can never get back in. But she saw this ad at the Apthorpe, which is one of those wonderful old buildings on the Upper West Side over at about 79th Street. It takes up the whole block. And it was 8 rooms for $1,500 a month. Okay, it was 1980, right? But it had a key fee of $23,000, and she was broke. So she told a few people, and people were like, "You're going to pay $23,000?" And she said, "Okay, if you saw this 8-room apartment, right?" And so she went to a bank to go borrow $23,000 to pay this key fee. And she didn't know, like, who does a key fee really go to? And it really, even to this day, you never hear about it anymore, I don't think, the key fee thing. But at the time, nobody quite knew where the key fee was going. But it certainly allowed the person who was applying for the apartment to, like, slip in. And I think, the fact that it was advertised, even in the New York Times, is just unbelievable. Well, here was her justification. She said she was going to live there the rest of her life because it was the most fabulous apartment, and why would she ever leave? So she said if she amortized $23,000 over the course of 30 years and divided by the number of days, she could justify it by saying it was the cost of a cappuccino each day. And then she added that she never uses the word amortized unless she's trying to justify something that she really can't afford. In truth, $1,500 a month for rent in 1980 was high. I mean, when I was coming to New York in 84, for us to spend more than about $650 a month divided by 2 people was a lot of money for us. And jumping up to $800 for 2 of us, $400 a person was a lot of money. So $1,500 a month for an apartment on the Upper West Side, which was dicey, that neighborhood. I mean, the Apthorpe was always nice, but it was not in great condition at the time. It was not all spiffed up. Yeah, key fee was advertised black and white in the New York Times. I was just reading about there are a couple of days where the sun lines up perfectly east-west. I remember doing a show one year at I've gotten the theater on West 54th Street. It was right beside the police station. And I remember a few days before the show was going to open, and it was early June. It's not the summer solstice. It's actually earlier than that, or maybe very late May. We're just walking west on 54th Street from, 7th Avenue or so, and this particular theater is between 8th and 9th. And I saw that, and I saw the sun just perfectly lining up. And I had that same feeling. I was just like, this is so beautiful. And it didn't cost me anything. And there's just so much hope there. I was heading to a rehearsal for a show that was going to open soon with friends who were really close friends. And we were not going to make a cent on the show. I mean, we weren't going to make anything, but it was so much fun. And I remember having one of those kind of nirvana moments of, this is the greatest city. And it's all about hope, because anything could happen. I could walk in that theater that day, and that agent that I had seen earlier might be in the theater, and I'd be like, oh, hi. I've lived in a few different places. And I went to college in the Midwest. I lived in Washington, D.C. I briefly lived in Florida, and of course in Boston. I always had this feeling like, yeah, but maybe I need to be somewhere else to do this thing. In other words, my life can start to happen, if I'm in this other place. And I hear people say that all the time. If only I were in Atlanta, if only I lived in Paris, if only I lived in San Francisco. But the whole time I lived in New York, I thought, no excuses. No excuses. Because, it can be hard. It can be difficult. There's no question about that. It's a tight city. But anything you want to do is there. If you need to go to school, you go there. If you need any kind of a job, it's there. Theater, finance, art, music. What is not there? I used to work all kinds of parties, and, I was really, really poor in New York. But you can live in New York, particularly if you're young and energetic, and be really poor, right? Because the whole city is like your home. It's like your yard. You look across at Morningside Park, and it might as well be your yard, right? You don't have to landscape it. It's great. So I used to work all these parties, and one time I was hired before Christmas time to work a party. It was at an acting school down in Chelsea. And I remember the only thing we were serving was champagne, and there were these window wells that were really deep because it was an old building. And so we put all the cases of champagne out on the window wells so they would be chilled. And then, and there were the enormous old windows. So I would lift up the windows, and in would come like the snow would be drifting in, and I'd have to grab the whole case, and then I'd be serving. Well, I remember one time I went to one of the window wells. So it's Chelsea, and I was looking north, and I opened up the window, and there was the Empire State Building lit up in red and green. And the snow came in as I was bringing in the champagne, and I thought, I'm like the luckiest person. I mean, how do you get any luckier than that? And to this day, when I think about that moment, it brings tears to my eyes. It was really magical. Yeah. And I remember thinking, I'm the luckiest person in the most beautiful city.